Yeah, I'm just doing from the online message. Okay, ready to go.
Okay.
The journey to America. Today, the ship is flying very smoothly. I feel today better. Yeah, I'm just doing from the online message. But I'm feeling separation from Sri Vrindavan and my lords, Sri Govinda, Gopinath, and Damodar. May my only solace is Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, in which I'm tasting the nectarine of Lord Chaitanya's Leela. I have left Bharata Bhumi just to execute the order of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati in pursuance of Lord Chaitanya's order. I have no qualification, but have taken up the risk just to carry out the order of His divine grace. I depend fully on their mercy, so far away from Vrindavan. Jaladuta Diary, September 10, 1965. Starting the chapter. The Jaladuta is a regular cargo carrier of the Scindia Steam Navigation Company, but there is a passenger cabin aboard. During the voyage from Calcutta to New York in August and September of 1965, the cabin was occupied by Sri Abhay Charanarvinda Bhaktivedanta Swami, whose age was listed as 69 and who was taken on board bearing a complimentary ticket with food. The Jaladuta, under the command of Captain Arun Pandya, whose wife was also aboard, left at 9 a.m. on Friday, August 13. In his diary, Srila Prabhupada noted, the cabin is quite comfortable. Thanks to Lord Shri Krishna for enlightening Sumati Morarji for these arrangements. I'm quite comfortable. But on the 14th, he reported seasickness, dizziness, vomiting, Bay of Bengal, heavy rains, more sickness. On the 19th, when the ship arrived at Colombo, basically we started at Calcutta, right? And coming down to Sri Lanka. So on the 19th, when the ship arrived at Colombo, Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, Prabhupada was able to get relief from his seasickness. The captain took him ashore and he traveled around Colombo by car. Then the ship went on toward Cochin on the west coast of India. Janmashtami, the appearance day of Lord Krishna, fell on the 20th of the August that year. Prabhupada took the opportunity to speak to the crew about the philosophy of Lord Krishna, and he distributed prasadam he had cooked himself. August 21 was his 69th birthday, observed without ceremony at sea. That same day, the ship arrived at Cochin, and Srila Prabhupada trunks of Srimad Bhagavatam volumes which had been shipped from Bombay were loaded on board. By 23rd, the ship had put out to the Red Sea, where Srila Prabhupada encountered great difficulty. He noted in his diary, rain, seasickness, dizziness, headache, no appetite, vomiting. The symptoms persisted, but it was more than seasickness. The pains in his chest made him think he would die at any moment. In 2 days, he suffered 2 heart attacks. He tolerated the difficulty, meditating on the purpose of his mission. But after 2 days of such violent attacks, he thought that if another were to come, he would certainly not survive. On the night of second day, Prabhupada had a dream. Lord Krishna, in his many forms, was rowing a boat. And he told Prabhupada that he should not fear, but should come along. Prabhupada felt assured of Lord Krishna's protection and the violent attacks did not recur. The Jaladuta entered the Suez Canal on September 1 and stopped in Port Said on the 2nd. Srila Prabhupada visited the city with the captain and said that he liked it. By the 6th, he had recovered a little from his illness and was eating regularly again for the first time in 2 weeks, having cooked his own khichdi and puris. He reported in his diary that his strength renewed little by little. Thursday, September 9. To 4 this afternoon, we have crossed over the Atlantic Ocean for 24 hours. The whole day was clear and almost smooth. I'm taking my food regularly and have got some strength to struggle. There is also a slight taking of the ship, and I'm feeling a slight headache also, because when the ship is moving hither and thither with the waves, it's a slight taking and giving the headache. There is also a slight taking of the ship. I'm feeling slight headache also, but I'm struggling. And the nectarine of life is Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, the source of my vitality. Friday, September 10. Today, the ship is flying very smoothly. I feel good. I feel today better, but I'm feeling separation from Sri Vrindavan and my Lord Sri Govinda, Gopinath, Radha Damodar. The only solace is Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, in which I'm tasting the nectarine of Lord Chaitanya's Leela pastimes. I have left Bharata Bhumi just to execute the order of Sri Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati in pursuance of Lord Chaitanya's order. I have no qualification, but have taken up the risk just to carry out the order of His divine grace. I depend fully on their mercy so far away from Vrindavan. During the voyage, Srila Prabhupada sometimes stood on deck at the ship's rail, watching this ocean and the sky and thinking of Chaitanya Charitamrita, Vrindavan Dhamma, and the order of his spiritual master to go preach in the West. Mrs. Pandya, the captain's wife, whom Srila Prabhupada considered to be an intelligent and learned lady, foretold Srila Prabhupada's future. If he were to pass beyond this crisis in his health, she said, it would indicate the goodwill of Lord Krishna. So the ocean voyage of 1965 was a calm one for the Jaladuta. The captain said that never in his entire career had he seen such a calm Atlantic crossing. Prabhupada replied that the calmness was Lord Krishna's mercy, and Mrs. Pandya asked Prabhupada to come back with them so they might have another such crossing. Srila Prabhupada wrote in his diary, if the Atlantic would have shown its usual face, perhaps I would have died. But Lord Krishna has taken charge of the ship. On September 13, Prabhupada noted in his diary, 32nd day of journey, cooked bati khichdi. It appeared to be delicious, so I was able to take some food. Today, I have disclosed my mind to my companion, Lord Shri Krishna. There is a Bengali poem made by me in this connection. This poem was a prayer to Lord Krishna, and it is filled with Prabhupada's devotional confidence in the mission that he had undertaken on behalf of his spiritual master. An English translation of the opening stanzas goes as follows. See appendix for the complete Bengali verses with English translation. Let's see the appendix now.
Okay.
Appendix. It's not there. Markine Bhagavad Dharma. Is this the one? I emphatically say to you, O brothers, you will obtain your good fortune. This is not Markandeya Bhagavatam. Prayers to the lotus feet of Krishna. Krishna kabab punya habe bhai, e punya koribe jabe, radharani kushi habe, dhruv ati bolo to matai. Translation: I emphatically say to you, brothers, you will obtain your good fortune from the Supreme Lord Krishna when Srimati Radharani becomes pleased with you.
There is
Shri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. What's that, Mataji?
in the book, his actual handwriting and
Really?
Wow. Krishna.
I think we should sing this bhajan on the Ram Navami. You can plan for it, Mataji.
I think the slots are already taken, but yeah, maybe
After the Aarti will be time, no? After evening program, it will be free. Shri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who is very dear to Lord Gauranga, Lord Chaitanya, the son of Mother Sachi, is unparalleled in his service to the Supreme Lord Shri Krishna. He is that great saintly spiritual master who bestows intense devotion to Krishna at different places throughout the world. By his strong desire, the holy name of Lord Gauranga will spread throughout all the countries of the Western world. In all the cities, towns, and villages on earth, from all seas, oceans, rivers, and streams, everyone will chant the holy name of Krishna. At the vast mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as the vast mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu conquers all directions, a flood of transcendental ecstasy will suddenly cover the land. When all the sinful, miserable living entities become happy, the Vaishnava's desire is then fulfilled. Although my Guru Maharaj ordered me to accomplish this mission, I am not worthy or fit to do it. I am very fallen and insignificant. Therefore, O Lord, now I am begging for your mercy so that I may become worthy, for you are the wisest and the most experienced of all. The poem ends. Today, the remembrance of you came into me in a very nice way, because I have a great longing. I call to you. I am your eternal servant, and therefore I desire your association so much. O Lord Krishna, except for you, there is no means of success. In the same straightforward, factual manner in which he had noted the date, the weather, and his state of health, he now described his helpless dependence on his companion, Lord Krishna, and his absorption in the ecstasy of separation from Krishna. He described the relationship between the spiritual master and the disciple, and he praised his own spiritual master, Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. By whose strong desire, the holy name of Gauranga will spread throughout all the countries of the Western world. He plainly stated that his spiritual master had ordered him to accomplish this mission of worldwide Krishna consciousness, and feeling unworthy, he prayed to Lord Krishna for strength. The last verses give an unexpected confidential glimpse into Srila Prabhupada's direct relationship with the Lord Krishna. Prabhupada called on Krishna as his dear friend and longed for the joy of again wandering the fields of Raja. This memory of Krishna, he wrote, came because of a great desire to serve the Lord. Externally, Srila Prabhupada was experiencing great inconvenience. He had been aboard ship for a month and had suffered heart attacks and repeated seasickness. Moreover, even if he were to recover from these difficulties, his arrival in America would undoubtedly bring many more difficulties. But remembering the desire of his spiritual master, taking strength from his reading of Chaitanya Charitamrita, and revealing his mind in his prayer to Lord Krishna, Prabhupada remained confident. After a 35-day journey from Calcutta, the Jaladuta reached Boston's Commonwealth Pier at 5:30 a.m. on September 17, 1965. The ship was to stop briefly in Boston before proceeding to New York City. Among the first things Srila Prabhupada saw in America were the letters A and P painted on a pierfront warehouse. The gray waterfront dawn revealed the ships in the harbor, a conglomeration of lobster stands and drab buildings, and rising on the distance the Boston skyline. Prabhupada had to pass through US immigration and customs in Boston. His visa allowed him a 3-month stay, and an official stamped it to indicate his expected date of departure. Captain Pandya invited Prabhupada to take a walk into Boston, where the captain intended to do some shopping. They walked across a footbridge into a busy commercial area with old churches, warehouses, office buildings, bars, tawdry bookshops, nightclubs, and restaurants. Prabhupada briefly observed the city, but the most significant thing about his short stay in Boston, aside from the fact that he had now set foot in America, was that at Commonwealth Pier he wrote another Bengali poem entitled Markine Bhagavata Dharma, Teaching Krishna Consciousness in America. Some of the verses he wrote on board the ship that day are as follows. My
Can
Lord,
I read, Prabhuji?
are you sure, Mataji?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay.
My dear Lord Krishna, you are so kind upon this useless soul, but I do not know why you have brought me here. Now you can do whatever you like with me. But I guess you have some business here. Otherwise, why would you bring me to this terrible place? Most of the population here is covered by the material modes of ignorance and passion, absorbed in material life. They think themselves very happy and satisfied, and therefore they have no taste for the transcendental message of Vasudeva, Krishna. I do not know how they will be able to understand it, but I know that your causeless mercy can make everything possible because you are the most expert mystic. How will they understand the mellows of devotional service? O Lord, I am simply praying for your mercy so that I will be able to convince them about your message. All living entities have come under the control of the illusory energy by your will. And therefore, if you like, by your will, they can also be released from the clutches of illusion. I wish that you may deliver them. Therefore, if you so desire their deliverance, then only will they be able to understand your message. How will I make them understand this message of Krishna consciousness? I am very unfortunate, unqualified, and the most fallen. Therefore, I am seeking your benediction so that I can convince them, for I am powerless to do so on my own. Somehow or other, O Lord, you have brought me here to speak about you. Now, my Lord, it is up to you to make me a success or failure as you like. O spiritual master of the world of all the worlds, I can simply repeat your message. So, if you like, you can make my power of speaking suitable for their understanding. Only by your causeless mercy will my words become pure. I am sure that when this transcendental message penetrates their hearts, they will certainly feel gladdened and thus become liberated from all unhappy conditions of life. O Lord, I am just like a puppet in your hands. So if you have brought me here to dance, then make me dance. Make me dance. O Lord, make me dance as you like. I have no devotion, nor do I have any knowledge, but I have strong faith in the holy name of Krishna. I have been designated as Bhakti Vedanta, and now, if you like, you can fulfill the real purport of Bhakti Vedanta. Signed, the most unfortunate, insignificant beggar, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, on board the ship Jaladuta, Commonwealth Pier, Boston, Massachusetts, USA, dated 18th September 1965. He was now in America. He was in a major American city, rich with billions, populated with millions, and determined to stay the way it was. Prabhupada saw Boston from the viewpoint of a pure devotee of Krishna. He saw the hellish city life, people dedicated to the illusion of material happiness. All his dedication and training moved him to give these people the transcendental knowledge and saving grace of Krishna consciousness. Yet he was feeling weak, lowly, and unable to help them on his own. He was but an insignificant beggar with no money. He had barely survived the two heart attacks at city. He spoke a different language. He dressed strangely. Yet he had come to tell people to give up meat eating, illicit sex, intoxication, and gambling, and to teach them to worship Lord Krishna, whom to them was a mystical Hindu god. What would he be able to accomplish? Helplessly, he spoke his heart directly to God. I wish that you may deliver them. I am seeking your benediction so that I can convince them. And for convincing them, he would trust in the power of God's holy name and in the Srimad Bhagavatam. This transcendental sound would clean away desire for material enjoyment from their hearts and awaken loving service to Krishna. On the streets of Boston, Prabhupada was aware of the power of ignorance and passion that dominated the city, but he had faith in the transcendental process. He was tiny, but God was infinite, and God was Krishna, his dear friend. On the 19th of September, the Jaladuta sailed into New York Harbor and docked at a Brooklyn pier at 70th Street. Srila Prabhupada saw the awesome Manhattan skyline, the Empire State Building, and like millions of visitors and immigrants in the past, the Statue of Liberty. Srila Prabhupada was dressed appropriately for a resident of Vrindavana. He wore kantimala, neck beads, and a simple cotton dhoti, and he carried japamala, chanting beads, and an old chadar or shawl. His complexion was golden, his head shaven, shika in the back, his forehead decorated with the whitish Vaishnava tilak. He wore pointed white rubber slippers, not uncommon for sadhus in India, but who in New York had ever seen or dreamed of anyone appearing like this Vaishnava?
Hmm.
He was possibly the first Vaishnava sannyasi to
Hmm.
arrive in New York with uncompromised appearance. Of course, New Yorkers have an expertise in not giving much attention to any kind of strange new arrival. Srila Prabhupada was on his own. He had a sponsor, Mr. Agarwal, somewhere in Pennsylvania. Surely someone would be able to would be here to greet him. Although he had little idea of what to do as he walked off the ship onto the pier, I did not know whether to turn right or left. He passed through the dockside formalities and was met by a representative from Travelers Aid sent by the Agarwals in Pennsylvania, who offered to take him to the India ticket office in Manhattan to book his return passage to India. At the Skindia office, Prabhupada spoke with the ticket agent, Joseph Forrester, who was impressed by this unusual passenger's Vaishnava appearance, his light luggage, and his apparent poverty. He regarded Prabhupada as a priest. Most of India's passengers were businessmen or families. So Mr. Forster had never seen a passenger wearing the traditional Vaishnava dress of India. He found Srila Prabhupada to be a pleasant gentleman who spoke of the nice accommodations and treatment he had received aboard the Jaladuta. Prabhupada asked Mr. Forster to hold space for him on a return ship to India. His plans were to live in about 2 months, and he told Mr. Forster that he would keep in touch, carrying only 40 rupees cash, which he himself called a few hours spending in New York, and an additional $20 he had collected from selling 3 volumes of the Bhagavatam to Captain Pandya, Srila Prabhupada, with umbrella and suitcase in hand, and still escorted by the traveler's aid representative, set out for the Port Authority bus terminal to arrange for his trip to Butler. Next chapter, Prabhuji.
That's it. No, hold for a minute, Mataji.
Okay.
Say something. Say how was it to you? Share with us.
So nicely, Prabhupada depended everything on Krishna and his Guru Maharaj. He was singing that poem nicely. His heart's description, Prabhuji.
We should also do like that, no?
Yes, Prabhuji.
We should not wait whether we can do it or not in a menu. Anyway, we cannot do it, but we should go for it.
We should develop that mood of completely dependent on Krishna. So nice poem, this page. And after that, how he came, what he was thinking, and he worked so hard, Prabhuji.
It is such a moment he touched the land, actually.
That too in 1965.
65. In his sadhu appearance,
with
how
only white rubber slippers.
How the sadhus in Vrindavan, right? They're just emancipated in their practice austerities. And then he comes.
And so nicely he left Vrindavan, right? Nice place. Who wants to leave Vrindavan? That too in 1965. So pure. No commercial thing, nothing. But still he came for us.
He came for us. We should really.
And no money in his hands. No one in his hands, but he still worked very hard. Yeah.
Chintamani Mataji.
Yes, Prabhu. I was thinking when I first came to the US, how nervous I was.
Really?
And how
you are a big shot.
No, not this time. When I originally first came with my son, 1-year-old boy.
That's what still you are a big shot at that time. Accomplished.
I've never been a big shot. Neither am I now. But yeah, it was so just, Prabhupada definitely shows his surrender and of course his dedication to his Guru Maharaj. How he just came in complete abandon and surrender to Krishna.
The mention is not here, but after coming from Bombay, before boarding the ship in Calcutta, he goes to Lord Advaita Acharya's place, Shantipur, and then it was mentioned there that there was a place where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Advaita Acharya and Lord Nityananda would sit and plan for propagation of Krishna consciousness. They have a sitting place. So they sit there and plan out. So Prabhupada goes there and cries and cries and cries. And the pujari comes and asks, "What happened? You're crying very badly." He says, my Guru Maharaj ordered me to go. I got the opportunity. I'm praying for the mercy like that.
Mm. Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
okay. Butler, Pennsylvania, that first testing ground.
By the grace of Lord Krishna, the Americans are prosperous in every respect. They are not poverty stricken like the Indians. The people in general are satisfied so far as their material needs are concerned, and they are spiritually inclined. When I was in Butler, Pennsylvania, about 500 miles from New York City, I saw there many churches and they were attending regularly. This shows that they are spiritually inclined. I was also invited by some churches and church government schools and colleges, and I spoke there. And they appreciated it and presented me some token rewards. When I was speaking to the students, they were very eager to hear about the principles of Srimad Bhagavatam, but the clergymen were cautious about allowing students to hear me so patiently. They feared that the students might be converted to Hindu ideas, as is quite natural for any religious sect. But they do not know the devotional service of the Lord Sri Krishna is the common religion for everyone, including even the aborigines and cannibals in the jungle. From a letter to Sumati Morariji, the bus came swinging out of the terminal into the daylight of midtown Manhattan, riding along in the shadows of skyscrapers through asphalt streets crowded with people, trucks, and automobiles, and into the heavy traffic bound towards the Lincoln Tunnel. The bus entered the tunnel and emerged on the Jersey side of the Hudson River, continuing down the New Jersey Turnpike past fields of huge oil tanks and sprawling refineries. The Manhattan skyline was on the left, while 3 lanes of traffic sped 60 miles an hour in each direction. Newark Airport came up close up by on the right, with jets visible on the ground, electric power lines spanning aloft between street towers, stretched into the horizon. Srila Prabhupada had never before witnessed anything of such magnitude. He was now seeing for himself that American culture was based on passion for more and more sense gratification, and it was a scene of madness. For what important business were people rushing to and fro at breakneck speed? He could see their goals advertised on the billboards. Of course, he had many times traveled the road from Delhi to Vrindavana, but it did not have any he did not have many advertisements. A traveler would see mostly the land, roadside streams, temples, homes, farmers in their fields. Most people went on foot or traveled by ox cart or bicycle, and in Brundavana, even the ordinary passers-by greeted each other by calling the names of God. Jai Radhe, Hare Krishna. Now there were factories outside Delhi, but nothing like this. The cumulative effect did not pack nearly the materialistic punch of these fields of oil tanks, mammoth factories, and billboards alongside the crowded superhighway. Meat eating, illicit sex, intoxication, and gambling, the very sins Srila Prabhupada had come to preach against, were proudly glamorized on mile after mile of billboards. The signs promoted liquor and cigarettes, roadside restaurants offered slaughtered cows in the form of steaks and hamburgers, and no matter what the product it was usually advertised by a lusty-looking woman. But Prabhupada had come to teach the opposite, that happiness is not found in the passion for sense gratification, and that only when one becomes detached from the mode of passion, which leads to sinful acts, one can become eligible for the eternal happiness of Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada felt compassion. The compassion of a Krishna conscious saint had been explained in an age long ago by Prahlada Maharaja. I see that there are many saintly persons indeed, but they are interested only in their own deliverance, not caring for the big cities and towns. They go to the Himalayas or the forests to meditate with vows of silence. They are not interested in delivering others. As for me, however, I do not wish to be liberated alone, leaving aside from all these poor fools and rascals. I know that without Krishna consciousness, without taking shelter of your lotus feet, one cannot be happy. Therefore, I wish to bring them back to shelter at your lotus feet. The scenery gradually changed to the Pennsylvania countryside, and the bus sped through long tunnels in the mountains. Night came, and it was late, after 11, when the bus entered the heavily industrialized Pittsburgh area on the shore of the Allegheny River. Srila Prabhupada could not see the steel mills clearly, but he could see their lights and their industrial fires and smoking stacks. Millions of lights shone throughout the city's prevailing dinginess. When the bus finally pulled into the terminal, it was past midnight. Gopal Agarwal was waiting with the family Volkswagen bus to drive Prabhupada to Butler, about 1 hour north. He greeted Prabhupada with folded palms and "Welcome, Swamiji," bowing from the waist several times. This was not any of Gopal's doing. His father at Madura, businessman with a
With
fondness
fondness.
with a fondness for sadhus and religious causes, had requested to him to host the Swamiji. This was not the first time his father had arranged for a sadhu acquaintance to come to America. Several times he had sent sponsorship papers for Gopal to sign, and Gopal had obediently done so, but nothing had ever come of them. But when the sponsorship letter for A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami had come, Gopal had promptly signed and returned it, thinking that this would be the last they would hear of it. But then, just a week ago, a letter had come. Sally Agarwal had opened it, and then, in alarm, called to her husband, "Honey, sit down. Listen to this. The Swami is coming." Srila Prabhupada had enclosed his picture so that they would not mistake him. The Agarwals had looked curiously at the photograph. "There will be no mistake there," Gopal had said. The unsuspecting Agarwals were simple American people, according to Sally Agarwal, who had met her Indian husband while he was working as an engineer in Pennsylvania. What would they do with an Indian Swami in their house? Prabhupada was a shock for them, but there was no question of not accepting him. They were bound by the request of Gopal's father. Dutifully, Gopal had purchased Srila Prabhupada's ticket from New York to Pittsburgh and had arranged for the agent from Traveler's Aid to meet him. And dutifully, he had driven tonight to meet him. So it was a mixture of embracement, disbelief, and wonder that Gopal Agarwal helped his guest into the VW and drove back home to Butler. September 20th, Butler, Pennsylvania, home of the Jeep, made a granite plague in the city park. Butler, famous as the town where the US Army Jeep was invented in 1940, was an industrial city of 20,000 settled amid the hills of an area rich in oil, coal, gas, and limestone. Its industry consisted mainly of factories for plate glass, railroad cars, refrigerators, oil equipment, and rubber goods. 90% of the local laborers were Native Americans. The nominal region had always been Christian, mostly Protestants, with some Catholic. And in later years, a few synagogue
Synagogue.
synagogues had appeared, but there was no Hindu community at that time. Gopal Agarwal was the first Indian to move to Butler. As the VW bus pulled into town, the pre-dawn air was warm and humid. The morning edition of the Butler Eagle would soon be going to the newsstands. Red Chinese fire on India. Prime Minister Chatterjee declares Chinese communists out to dominate world. United Nations Council demands Pakistan and India cease fire in 48 hours. Srila Prabhupada arrived at the Agarwal's home, Sterling Apartments, at 4 a.m. and Gopal invited him to sleep on the couch. Their place, a townhouse apartment, consisted of a small living room, a dining room, a kitchenette, 2 upstairs bedrooms, and a bath. Here they lived with their 2 young children. The Agarwals had lived in Butler for a few years now and felt themselves established in a good social circle. Since their apartment had so little space, they decided that it would be better if the Swami took a room at the YMCA and came to visit them during the day. Of course, living space was not the real difficulty. It was him. How would he fit into the Butler atmosphere? He was their guest, so they would have to explain him to their friends and neighbors. Srila Prabhupada was immediately a curiosity for whoever saw him. In anxiety, Mrs. Agarwal decided that instead of having people speculate about the strange man in orange robes living at her house, it would be better to let them know about him from the newspapers. She explained her plan to Prabhupada, who laughed, understanding that it did not fit in. Sally hurried off to a Pittsburgh newspaper office, but the interviewer was not able to comprehend why this person should make an interesting story. Sally then took him to the local Butler Eagle, where his presence was accepted as an indeed newsworthy. September 22nd, a feature article appeared in the Butler Eagle. In fluent English, devotee of Hindu cult explains commission to visit the West. A photographer had come to the Agarwal's apartment and had taken a picture of Srila Prabhupada standing in the living room, holding an open volume of Srimad Bhagavad Gita. The caption read, Ambassador of Bhakti Yoga. The article began. A slight brown man in faded orange drapes and wearing white bathing shoes stepped out of a compact car yesterday and into the Butler YMCA to attempt a meeting. He is A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swamiji, a messenger from India to the peoples of the West. The article referred to Srimad Bhagavatam as biblical literature and to Srila Prabhupada as the learned teacher. It continued. My mission is to revive a people's God consciousness, says the Swamiji. God is the father of all living beings in thousands of different forms. He explains, human life is a stage of perfection in evolution. If we miss the message, back we go through the process again, he believes. Bhaktivedanta lives as a monk and permits no woman to touch his food. On a 6-week ocean voyage and at the Agarwal apartment in Butler, he prepares his meals in a brass pan with separate levels for steaming rice, vegetables, and making bread at the same time. He is a strict vegetarian and is permitted to drink only milk. the miracle food for babies and old men. He noted, if Americans would give more attention to their spiritual life, they would be much happier, he says. The Agarwals had their own opinion as to why Prabhupada had come to America to finance his books and nothing more. They were sure that he was hoping only to meet someone who could help him with the publication of his Srimad Bhagavatam, and that he did not want any followers. At least they hoped he would not do anything to attract attention, and they felt that his was his mentality also. He did not create waves. Sally Agarwal says he did not want any crowd. He did not want anything. He only wanted to finance his books. Perhaps Prabhupada, seeing their nervousness, agreed to keep a low profile out of consideration for his hosts. Srila Prabhupada's prospered. The Jaladuta, if the Atlantic would have shown its usual face, perhaps I would. Okay. At Prabhupada's request, however, Mr. Agarwal held a kind of open house in his apartment every night from 6 to 9. Sally, it was quite an intellectual group that we were in, and they were fascinated by him. They hardly knew what to ask him. They did not know enough. This was just like a dream out of a book. Why would expect to meet a Swami in someone's living room in Butler, Pennsylvania? It was just really tremendous. In the middle of middle class America, my parents came from quite a distance to see him. We knew a lot of people in Pittsburgh and they came up. This was a very unusual thing, having him here. But the real interest shown in him was only as a curiosity. He had a typewriter, which was one of his few possessions, and an umbrella. That was one of the things that caused a sensation, that he always carried an umbrella, and it was a little chilly, and he was balding. So he always wore this hat that someone had made for him, like a swimming cap. It was a kind of sensation. And he was so brilliant that when he saw someone twice, he knew who they were. He remembered. He was a brilliant man. Or if he met him in our apartment and saw them in a car, he would remember their name and he would wave and say their name. He was a brilliant man. All the people liked him. They were amazed at how intelligent he was. The thing that got them was the way he remembered their name and his humorous way. He looked so serious all the time, but he was a very humorous person. He was forbidding in his looks, but he was very charming. He was the easiest guest I have had in my life because when I could not spend time with him, he chanted, and I knew he was perfectly happy. When I could not talk to him, he chanted. He was so easy, though, because I knew he was never bored. I never felt any pressure or tension about having him. He was oh so easy that when I had to take care of the children, he would just chant. It was so great. When I had to do things, he would just be happy chanting. He was a very good guest. When the people would come, they were always smoking cigarettes, but he would say, pay no attention, think nothing of it. That's what he said, think nothing of it. Because he knew we were different. I did not smoke in front of him. I knew I was not supposed to smoke in front of Gopal's father. So I sort of considered him the same. He did not make any problems for anybody. One evening, a guest asked Prabhupada, "What do you think of Jesus Christ?" And Prabhupada replied, "He is the Son of God." Then he added that he, the guest, was also a son of God. Everyone was interested to hear that the Swami accepted Jesus Christ as the Son of God. Gopal, his intent was not to have you change your way of life. He was not telling anybody they should be vegetarian or anything. All he wanted you to do was to follow what you are, but be better. He did not stress that we should give up many things. Srila Prabhupada followed a regulated daily schedule. Every morning he would walk the 6 or 7 blocks from the YMCA to Sterling Apartments, arriving there about 7. When he had first landed in New York, he had in his luggage a large bundle of dried cereal similar to rolled oats. This supply was enough for several weeks, and every morning at breakfast he would take some with milk. At 7:45, Gopal would leave for work, and around around 9:30, Prabhupada would start preparing his lunch in the kitchen. He made his chapatis by hand without even a rolling pin. He worked alone for 2 hours while Mrs. Agarwal did housework and took care of her children. At 11:30, he took prasadam. Sally, when he cooked, he used only one burner. The bottom level part created the steam. He had the dal on the bottom, and it created the stream to cook many other vegetables. So for about a week, he was cooking this great big lunch, which was ready about 11:30. And Gopal always came home for lunch about 12. I used to serve Gopal a sandwich, and then he would go back to work. But it did not take me long to realize that the food the Swami was cooking, we had enjoyed too. We would have enjoyed too. So he started cooking that moon meal for all of us. Oh, and we enjoyed it so much. Our fun was to show him that what we knew of America, and he had never seen such things. It was such fun to take him to the supermarket. He loved opening the package of okra or frozen beans, and he did not have to clean them and cut them and do all those things. He opened the freezer every day and just chose his items. It was fun to watch him. He sat on the couch while I swept with the vacuum cleaner, and he was so interested in that. And we talked for a long time about that. He was so interesting. So every day he had have this big feast, and everything was great fun. We really enjoyed it. I would help him cut the things. He would spice it and we would laugh. He was the most enjoyable man. I really felt like a sort of daughter to him, even in such a short time, like he was my father-in-law. He was friend of my father-in-law, but I really felt very close to him. He enjoyed everything. I liked him. I thought he was tremendous. After lunch,
Mother,
Prabhupada would.
whenever you want to stop, I can read.
Okay, Mataji. I thought he was tremendous. After lunch, Prabhupada would leave about 1 p.m. and walk to the YMCA, where the Agarwals figured he must have worked at his writing until 5. He would come back to their apartment about 6 in the evening after they had taken their meal. They ate meat, so Mrs. Agarwal was careful to have it cleared away before he came. When one night he came early, she said, "Oh, Swamiji, we have just cooked meat and the smell will be very disagreeable to you." But he said, "Oh, think nothing of it. Think nothing of it." In the evening, he would speak with guests. The guests would usually take coffee and other refreshments, but he would request a glass of warm milk at 9 o'clock. He would stay, speaking until 9:30 or 10, and then Mr. Agarwal would drive him back to the YMCA. Prabhupada would also do his own laundry every day. He washed his clothes in the Agarwal's bathroom and hung them to dry outside. He sometimes accompanied the Agarwals to the laundry mat and was interested to see how Americans washed and dried their clothes. To Sally, he seemed very interested in the American ways and people. Sally, our boy Bridgie, was 6 or 7 months old when the Swami came, and the Indians love boys. The Swami liked Bridge. He was there when Bridge first stood. The first time Bridge made the attempt and actually succeeded, the Swami stood up and clapped. It was a celebration. Another time, our baby teethed on the Swami's shoes. I thought, oh, those shoes, they have been all over India, and my kid is chewing on them. You know how a mother would feel. Almost every night, he used to sit in the next door neighbor's backyard. We sat out there sometimes with him, or we stayed in the living room. Our time, something happened with our little girl, Pamela, who was only 3 years old. I used to take her to Sunday school, and she learned about Jesus in Sunday school. Then, when she would see Swamiji with his robes on and everything, she called him Swami Jesus. And this one time, when it first dawned on us, when what she was saying, she called him Swami Jesus, and Swami smiled and said, "A little child should lead them." It was so funny. Prabhupada spoke to various groups in the community. He spoke at the Lions Club in early October and received a formal document. Be it known that A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami was a guest at the Lions Club of Butler, Pennsylvania, and has an expression of appreciation for services rendered. The club tenders this acknowledgement. He also gave a talk at the Y and at St. Fidelis Seminary College in Herman, Pennsylvania, and he spoke regularly to guests at the Agarwal home. When Professor Lawson, the chairman of the philosophy department at Slippery Rock State College, read in the Butler Eagle of a visiting Indian Swami and Vedic scholar, he phoned the Agarwal's home to invite Prabhupada to lecture on campus. Ellen Larson, I called the number given in the newspaper article, but it turned out that the Swamiji was actually staying in a room at the YMCA. When I arrived, he was waiting on the street corner and I picked him up. He seemed very much alone. When we were driving to Slippery Rock, I asked him to pronounce his name for me so I would have it right. When I introduced him to my class, he said, Swamiji Bhaktivedanta. And then he proceeded to tell me what that meant. Since I was not used to Indian names, he had to repeat it several times before I got it right. He showed no impatience with my slowness. Even at this early junction of our association, I was convinced that this man had an inner stability and strength that would be very difficult to shake. And thus, this initial impression was further reinforced throughout the rather busy days. 100 students from several classes had gathered to hear the lecture. As Prabhupada, in his natural, unrehearsed manner, walked down the aisle, up the 3 wooden steps, and onto the plain wooden stage. He sat down, erect and cross-legged, and began softly singing Hare Krishna, his eyes closed. Then he stood and spoke without a lectern or microphone and answered questions from the audience. The program lasted only 50 minutes and ended abruptly with a bell signaling from the next class. Ellen Larson. After the first class, I had a short conversation with the Swamiji while sitting outside on a bench on the campus lawn. Most of the time, when he was not directly engaged in conversation, he would repeat a short prayer while moving prayer beads through his fingers. He was sitting up cross legged and we were speaking back and forth. He said that the trees around us were beautiful and he asked, "What kind of trees are these?" I replied, "They are shade trees." Then he said that it was too bad they were not fruit or nut trees to provide food and benefit people. Mataji, you can continue, Mataji.
Sure. Hare Krishna. At 1 o'clock, Prabhupada lectured again. Afterward, he accompanied Dr. Mohan Sharma, a member of the faculty who attended the lecture, and his 16-year-old daughter, Minnie, to Dr. Sharma's campus residence. Prabhupada accepted warm milk and dry fruit, and at Dr. Sharma's request, blessed his home and touched the forehead of his daughter in a gesture of benediction. Around 3 o'clock, Professor Larson drove him back to Butler. Alan Larson. The Swamiji seemed to present himself as an Indian scholar who had come for a short time to do translation work. I never thought of him as a missionary. But during the course of the day, there grew in me a warm affection for this man, because he was unmistakably a good man who had found his way to a stability and peace that is very rare. The lectures in Pennsylvania gave Prabhupada his first readings of how his message would be received in America. At Commonwealth Pier in Boston, he had stated in his poem, "I'm sure that when this transcendental message penetrates their hearts, they will certainly feel gladdened and thus become liberated from all unhappy conditions of life." Now this principle was actually being tested in the field. Would they be able to understand? Were they interested? Would they surrender? October 15. Srila Prabhupada received a letter from Sumati Morarji in Bombay. Pujya Swami, I am in due receipt of your letter dated 24th ultimo, and glad to know that you have safely reached the USA after suffering from seasickness. I thank you for your greetings and blessings. I know by now you must have recovered fully from the sickness and must be keeping good health. I was delighted to read that you have started your activities in the States and have already delivered some lectures. I pray to Lord Balakrishna to give you enough strength to enable you to carry the message of Sri Bhagavatam. I feel that you should stay there until you fully recover from your illness and return only after you have completed your mission. Here everything is normal. With respects, yours sincerely, Sumati Morarji. Prabhupada regarded the last line of this letter as especially significant. His well-wisher was urging him to stay in America until he had completed his mission. He had told the immigration officials in New York that he would be staying in America for 2 months. I have 1 month's sponsorship in Butler, he thought, and then I have no support. So perhaps I can stay another month. So he had said 2 months. Sumati Morarji, however, was urging him to stay on. He saw that the prospects for preaching to the Americans were good, but he felt he would need support from India. At any rate, he had spent long enough in Butler, and he now had 1 month left in America. So he decided to go to New York City and try to preach there before his time was up. But first, he wanted to visit Philadelphia, where he had arranged a meeting with a Sanskrit professor, Dr. Norman Brown, at the University of Pennsylvania. Mrs. Agarwal was sorry to see him go. Sally, after a month, I really loved the Swami. I felt protective in a way, and he wanted to go to Philadelphia. But I couldn't imagine, I told him, I could not imagine him going to Philadelphia for 2 days. He was going to speak there and then to New York. But he knew no one in New York. If the thing didn't pan out in Philadelphia, he was just going to New York. And then there was no one. I just couldn't imagine. It made me sick. I remember the night he was leaving, about 2 in the morning. I remember sitting there as long as he could wait before Gopal took him to Pittsburgh to get on that bus. Gopal got a handful of change, and I remember telling him how to put the money in the slot so that he could take bath at the bus station, because he was supposed to take bath a few times a day. And Gopal told him how to do that and told him about the automats in New York. He told him that what he could eat and what he couldn't eat. And he gave him these coins in a sock. And that's all he left us with. As a sannyasi, Srila Prabhupada was used to picking up and leaving one place for another. As a mendicant preacher, he had no remorse about leaving behind the quiet life of the Butler YMCA. And he had no attachment for the domestic habitat where he would cook and talk with Sally Agarwal about vacuum cleaners, frozen foods, and American ways. But why had he gone to Butler? And why was he going to New York? He saw it as Krishna's grace. As a pure devotee of Krishna, he wanted to be an instrument for distributing Krishna consciousness. His stay in Butler had been helpful. He had gotten first-hand experience of American life, and he gained confidence that his health was strong and his message communicable. He was glad to see that America had the necessary ingredients for his Indian vegetarian diet, and that the people could understand his English. He had learned that casual one-time lectures here and there were of limited value, and that although there would be opposition from the established religions, people individually were very much interested in what he had to say. On October 18, he left Butler via Philadelphia for New York City. Chapter 3, Struggling Alone. I used to sit in the back and listen to his meetings silently. He was speaking all impersonal nonsense, and I kept my silence. Then one day he asked if I would like to speak, and I spoke about Krishna consciousness. I challenged that he was speaking manufactured philosophy and all nonsense from Shankaracharya. He tried to back out and said he was not speaking, Shankaracharya was speaking, I said. You are representing him. That is the same thing. He then said to me, Swamiji, I like you very much, but you cannot speak here. But although our philosophies differed and he would not let me speak, he was kind and I was nice to him. Srila Prabhupada in conversation. Prabhupada knew no one in New York City, but he had a contact, Dr. Ramamurthy Mishra. He had written Dr. Mishra from Butler. In closing the letter of introduction, Paramananda Mehra had given him in Bombay. He had also phoned Dr. Mishra, who welcomed Prabhupada to join him in New York. At the Port Authority bus terminal, a student of Dr. Mishra's met him as he arrived from Philadelphia and escorted him directly to an Indian festival in the city. There, Prabhupada met Dr. Mishra as well as Ravi Shankar and his brother, the dancer Uday Shankar. Prabhupada then accompanied Dr. Mishra to his apartment at 33 Riverside Drive beside the Hudson River. The apartment was on the 14th floor and had large windows overlooking the river. Dr. Mishra gave Prabhupada a room to himself. Dr. Mishra was a dramatic, showy personality, given to flashing glances and making expressive gestures with his hands. He regularly used words like lovely and beautiful, presenting an artfully polished image of what a guru should be. He was what some New Yorkers referred to as an uptown Swami. Before coming to America, Dr. Mishra had been a Sanskrit scholar and a guru as well as a doctor. He had written a number of books, such as the Textbook of Yoga Psychology and Self-Analysis and Self-Knowledge, a book based on the teachings of the monistic philosopher Shankara. After he came to the United States, he continued with his medical profession. But as he began taking disciples, he gradually dropped his practice. Although a sannyasi, he did not wear the traditional saffron dhoti and kurta, but instead wore tailored Nehru jackets and white slacks. His complexion was dark, whereas Prabhupada's was golden, and he had thick black hair. At 44, he was young enough to be Prabhupada's son. Dr. Mishra had been suffering from bad health when Srila Prabhupada came into his life, and Prabhupada's arrival seemed the perfect medicine. Ramamurti Mishra, His Holiness Prabhupada Bhaktivedanta Goswamiji really knocked me down with love. He was really an incarnation of love. My body had become a skeleton, and he really brought me back to life. His cooking, and especially his love and devotion to Lord Krishna. I was very lazy in the matter of cooking, but he would get up and have ready. Dr. Mishra appreciated that Prabhupada, cooking with the precision of a chemist, would prepare many dishes, and that he had a gusto for eating. Ramamurti Mishra, it was not bread he gave me prasadam. This was life, and he saved my life. At that time, I was not sure I would live, but his habit to eat on time, whether I was hungry or not, that I very much liked. He'd get up and say, all right, this is Bhagavad Prasadam. And I would say, all right. John Sewell, an old student of Dr. Mishra's, often saw Srila Prabhupada and her teacher together at the Riverside Drive apartment. Joan Sewell. I have a memory of Swamiji as a child in the sense of his being very innocent, a very simple person, very pure. The impression I have from Dr. Mishra is that he regarded Swamiji as a father figure who was kindly and good. But basically, the words most often used referring to Swamiji were like a child, meaning that he was simple in a classical, beautiful sense. Dr. Mishra mentioned to me when I was first introduced to Swamiji that he was a very holy man, very religious, wrapped in God consciousness. Swamiji was very sweet. I myself remember him as a very, very good man, even in the practical details of living in New York, which seemed to involve him very much, because he was a practical man and was looking for the best place to begin his work. I remember very well that he was always careful about washing his clothes out every night. I would come in and find a group of students in the living area of Dr. Mishra's apartment, and in the bathroom would be hung Swamiji's orange robes. Srila Prabhupada would sometimes discuss with Dr. Mishra the aim of his visit to America, expressing his spiritual master's vision of establishing Krishna consciousness in the West. He requested Dr. Mishra to help him, but Dr. Mishra would always refer to his own teaching work, which kept him very busy, and to his plans for leaving the country soon. After a few weeks, when it became inconvenient to maintain Prabhupada at the apartment, Dr. Mishra shifted him to his Hatha Yoga studio on the 5th floor of 100 West 72nd Street near Central Park. The large studio was located in the center of the building and included an office with an adjoining private room where Prabhupada stayed. It had no windows. Philosophically, at complete odds with Prabhupada, Dr. Mishra accepted the absolute truth in the impersonal feature, or Brahman, to be supreme. Prabhupada stressed the supremacy of the personal feature, or Bhagavan, following the Vedic theistic philosophy that the most complete understanding of the absolute truth is personal. The Bhagavad Gita says that the impersonal Brahman is subordinate to Bhagavan and is an emanation from him, just as the sunshine is an emanation from the sun planet. This conclusion had been taught by the leading traditional acharyas of ancient India, such as Ramanuja and Madhva. And Srila Prabhupada was in disciplic succession from Madhva. Dr. Madhva, Madhva. Dr. Mishra, on the other hand, followed Samskara, who taught, followed Shankara, who taught that the impersonal presence of the absolute truth is all in all, and that the personality of Godhead is ultimately an illusion. Oh. Whereas Prabhupada's theistic philosophy accepted the individual spiritual self, Atma, as an eternal servant of the supreme spiritual being, Bhagavan. Dr. Mishra's view accepted the spiritual self not as an individual. Rather, his idea was that since each person is identical with God, the Supreme Brahman, there is no need to worship God outside oneself. As Dr. Mishra put it, everything is one. Prabhupada challenged, if each of us is actually the Supreme, then why is this Supreme suffering and struggling in the material world? Dr. Mishra would counter that the Supreme is only temporary, covered by illusion, and that through Hatha Yoga and meditation one would become enlightened, understanding it is all the Supreme. Prabhupada would again challenge, but if the Supreme could be covered by illusion, then illusion would be greater than God, greater than the Supreme. Prabhupada considered Dr. Mishra a Mayavadi because of his inadvertent acceptance that Maya, illusion, is greater than the absolute truth. For Srila Prabhupada, not only was the impersonal philosophy unpalatable, it was also an insult to the personality of Godhead. According to Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita 7.24 and 9.11, unintelligent men who know me not think unintelligent men who know me not think that I have assumed this form and personality. Due to their small knowledge, they do not know my higher nature, which is changeless and supreme. Fools deride me when I appear in this human form. They do not know my transcendental nature and my supreme dominion over all that be. Lord Chaitanya had also strongly refuted the Mayavad philosophy. Everything about the Supreme Personality of Godhead is spiritual, including his body, opulence, and paraphernalia. Mayavad philosophy, however, covers his spiritual opulence and advocates the theory of impersonalism. Before coming to America, Srila Prabhupada had written in his Bhagavatam purports, the ambitious Mayavadi philosophers desire to merge into the existence of the Lord. This form of mukti, liberation, means denying one's individual existence. In other words, it is a kind of spiritual suicide. It is absolutely opposed to the philosophy of Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti Yoga offers immortality to the individual conditioned soul. If one follows the Mayavad philosophy, he misses his opportunity to become immortal after giving up the material body. In the words of Lord Chaitanya, Mayavadi Krishna Aparadhi. Mayavadi impersonalists are great offenders unto Lord Krishna. Thus, Lord Chaitanya had concluded that if one even hears the commentary of Shankara, one's entire spiritual life is spoiled. Dr. Mishra was content to align himself with the philosophy of Shankara and allow Prabhupada to stay with Lord Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita. But Srila Prabhupada pointed out that even Shankara accepted that the personality of Godhead, Krishna or Narayana, exists eternally beyond the material world. Therefore, he is a transcendental person, Narayana Paro Avyaktat. A mendicant, Prabhupada was temporarily dependent on the will of his Mayavadi acquaintance, with whom he regularly ate and conversed, and from whom he accepted shelter. But what a great inconvenience it was. He had come to America to speak purely and boldly about Krishna, but he was being restricted. In Butler, he had been confined to his host's middle-class sensibilities. Now he was silenced in a different way. He was treated with kindness, but he was considered a threat. Dr. Mishra could not allow his students to hear the exclusive praise of Lord Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Spending most of his time in his new room, Srila Prabhupada kept at his typing and translating. But when Dr. Mishra held his yoga classes, Prabhupada would sometimes come out and lead a kirtan or lecture. Robert Nelson, one of Prabhupada's first young sympathizers in New York. I went to Dr. Mishra's service and Dr. Mishra talked. Swamiji was sitting on a bench, and then all of a sudden, Dr. Mishra stops the service and he gets a big smile and says, Swamiji will sing us a song. I think Dr. Mishra wouldn't let him speak. Somebody told Dr. Mishra didn't want him to preach. Every morning, several hours before dawn, Prabhupada would rise, take his bath, chant Hare Krishna on his beads, and work at his translating while outside his closed-in, windowless chamber. Dawn came and the city awoke. He had no stove, so daily he had to walk the 7 blocks to the Riverside Drive apartment to cook. Wow. It would be late morning when he would come out onto the busy street. He would walk north on Columbus Avenue amid the steady flow of pedestrians, pausing at each intersection in a sweeping breeze from the river. Instead of the small town scenery of Butler, he passed through the rows of 30-story office buildings on Columbus Avenue. At street level were shoe repair shops, candy stores, laundries, and continental restaurants. The upper stories held the professional suites of doctors, dentists, and lawyers. At 75th Street, he would turn west and walk through a neighborhood of brown-stoned apartments, and then across Amsterdam to Broadway, with its Center Island Park. The greenery here could more accurately be described as blackery, since it was covered with soot and city grime. Broadway displayed its produce shops and butcher shops with their strands extending onto the sidewalk. And old men sat on benches in the thin strip of park between the northbound and southbound traffic. The last block on the 75th, before Riverside Drive, held high-rise apartment buildings with doormen standing. 33 Riverside Drive also had a doorman. Sometimes Prabhupada would walk in Riverside Park. Still careful for the condition of his heart, he liked the long stretches of flat walking area. Sometimes he would walk from Dr. Mishra's studio down 72nd Street to Amsterdam Avenue to the West End Superette, where he would buy produce and spices for his cooking. Sometimes he would wander through Manhattan without any fixed direction, and sometimes he would take buses to different areas of the city. On weekends, Prabhupada would accompany Dr. Mishra to his Ananda Ashram, 1-hour drive north of the city in Monroe, New York. Joan Sowell, who used to drive them, would overhear their animated conversation in the back seat of her car. Although they spoke in Hindi, she could hear their discussions turning into loud shouting arguments, and afterwards they would again become friends. At Ananda Ashram, Prabhupada would usually hold kirtan with Dr. Mishra's students, joining him in the chanting and even in dancing. Dr. Mishra was particularly fond of Prabhupada's chanting. Ramamurthy Mishra, I've never seen or met any devotee who sang so much. And his kirtan was just ambrosial. If you pay attention and become relaxed, that voice has very electrical vibrations on your heart. You cannot avoid it. 99% of the students, whether they liked it or not, got up and danced and chanted. Wow. And I left, and I felt very blessed to have to meet such a great soul. Harvey Cohen, a visitor to Ananda Ashram. Everyone got up early and went to morning meditation. Dr. Mishra was dressed in a golden Indian-style jacket, and his students were already deeply into it when I entered the room. All the cushions were taken, so I picked a spot in the back of the room where I could lean against the wall to facilitate my meditation. Seated at one side was an older Indian man in saffron cloth and wrapped in a pinkish wool blanket. He seemed to be muttering to himself, and I later discovered that he was praying. It was Swami Bhaktivedanta. His forehead was painted with a white V-shaped sign, and his eyes were half shut. He seemed so serene. Harvey tried, but he couldn't do the Raja Yoga. He was new to Amanda. Harvey tried, but he couldn't do the Raja Yoga. He was new to Ananda Ashram and had only come up for a weekend retreat. During his morning meditation, he found himself more attracted to the green mists above the lake outside the window than to the circle on the wall he was supposed to be meditating on. Harvey, I went to my room. The rain was increasing and beating against the windows. It was peaceful, and I was glad to be alone. I read for a while. Suddenly, I sensed someone standing at the doorway. Looking up, I saw it was the Swami. He was wrapped in his pink blanket like a shawl. Can I come in? He asked. I nodded yes, and he asked if he could sit on the chair in the corner. What are you reading? He smiled. Kafka's Diaries, I replied, feeling a little embarrassed. Huh? He asked, and I put the book down. He asked what I was doing at the ashram and if I was interested in yoga. What kind of yoga are you studying? I don't know much about it, I answered, but I think I'd like to study Hatha Yoga. This did not impress him. There are better things than this, he explained. There are higher and more direct forms of yoga. Bhakti Yoga is the highest. It is the science of devotion to God. As he spoke, I got the overpowering realization that he was right. He was speaking the truth. A creepy, ecstatic sensation came over me that this man was my teacher. His words were so simple, and I kept looking at him all weekend. He would sit so calm and dignified with warmth, and he asked me to visit him when he got back to the city. Dr. Mishra would give lectures carrying the impersonal interpretation of Bhagavad Gita according to Shankara, and Prabhupada, when allowed to speak, would counter him. Once, Prabhupada asked Dr. Mishra to help him in spreading Lord Chaitanya's movement, but Dr. Mishra sidestepped Prabhupada by saying that he considered Prabhupada an incarnation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and therefore not in need of help. Prabhupada replied that since Mishra was also the name of Lord Chaitanya's father, Dr. Mishra should help spread Lord Chaitanya's movement. Srila Prabhupada offered to engage him in checking the Sanskrit to his translations of Srimad Bhagavatam. But Dr. Mishra declined, and a decision he later regretted. Okay. Hurta Lurch, a student at Ananda Ashram. My direct encounter with him was in the kitchen. He was very particular and very definite that he would only eat what he cooked himself. He would come and say, "Get me a pot." So when I brought him a pot, he'd say, "No, bigger." So I brought him a bigger pot and he'd say, "No, smaller." Then he would say, "Get me potato." So I'll bring
him a potato. He prepared food very, very quietly. He never spoke very much. He prepared potatoes and then some vegetables and then chapatis. After cooking, he would eat outside. He would usually cook enough to go around for Dr. Mishra and about 5 or 6 other people. Wow. Every day he would cook that much when he was there. I learned to make chapatis from him. He usually stayed only for the weekend and then went to the city. I think he felt that was where his main work was to be done. This was certainly true. But what could he do there with no money or support? He was thinking of staying only for a few weeks and then going back to India. In the meantime, he was working on his Srimad Bhagavatam manuscripts. Walking in Manhattan and writing letters. He was studying a new culture, calculating practically, and imagining, hopefully, how to introduce Krishna consciousness to the Western world. He expressed his thoughts to Sumati Morarji. October 27. As far as I have studied, the American people are very much eager to learn about the Indian way of spiritual realization. And there are so many so-called yoga ashramas in America also. Yeah. Sorry. There were so many so-called yoga ashramas in America. Unfortunately, they are not very much adored by the government. And it is learned that such yoga ashrams have exploited the innocent people, as far as has been the case in India also. The only hope is that they are spiritually inclined, and immense benefit can be done to them if the cult of Srimad Bhagavatam is preached here. Srila Prabhupada noted that the Americans were also giving a good reception to Indian art and music. Just to see the mode of reception, he attended the performance of a Madrasi dancer, Bala Saraswati. I went to see the dance with a friend, although for the last 40 years I have never attended such dance ceremonies. The dancer was successful in her demonstration. The music was an Indian classical tune, mostly in Sanskrit language, and the American public appreciated them. So I was encouraged to see the favorable circumstance about my future preaching work. He said the Bhagavatam could also be preached through music and dance, but he had no means to introduce it. The Christian missions, backed by huge resources, were preaching all over the world. So why couldn't the devotees of Krishna combine to preach the Bhagavatam all over the world? He also noted that the Christian missionaries had not been effective in checking the spread of communism, whereas a Bhagavatam movement could be, because of its philosophical, scientific approach. He was deliberately planting a seed of inspiration in the mind of the devoted, wealthy Sumati Morarji.
Yeah, shall hold here, Mataji?
Yes, Prabhu.
You have been reading and reading.
So all the people that he came in contact with were so kind of impressed, and he was just so kind and nice to them, that kind, but in spite of opposing philosophies, whereas Dr. Mishra was a Mayavad, and Prabhupada obviously was teaching bhakti. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and how once again his detachment, he just left Butler in spite of having at least some kind of an arrangement there.
Yeah.
And came to New York.
Mm.
And he actually cooked and served prasad right from the start to everybody that he stayed with or came in contact with.
Mm. Yeah.
So prasad is so important.
Mm?
I think prasad is so important.
Yeah.
The way to
The butler, it was noted, Shiva, he was not allowing anyone to touch his food. Prasad is much important.
Yep.
Anusha Mataji?
Haribol Prabhu.
Yeah, Mataji.
Yes, Mataji. Yes, Prabhu. Sorry. Like so many challenges during the journey of Prabhupada, especially at the age of 70 years old. He used to walk in the the city of New York, where he used to cook. He used to walk just for cooking. So, and he used to. He had to stay with the Mayavadi philosophy. I mean, but wherever he went, the people were so happy. I see their comments saying that they were very happy, and they were talking about the Prabhupada's personality, how he was, and no one felt that he's a burden or something. So that gentle and serene he is. So very nice personality the Prabhupada have, and everywhere people felt like a daughter, or some nice feelings. So it's very, very. I felt very nice about Prabhupada's personality. It's so beautiful, and I really like the way he made the food, the prasadam, in 3 pots. In down, he used to cook the dal, and in between veggies, and then I think up again the potatoes or something. So just in one time, that's it. He's cooking a big meal for so many people, and people love the prasadam.
It was a feast.
It's a feast, and he made the chapatis with hand. There's no rolling pin. Amazing. Yeah, so nice.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay. Haribol will come back tomorrow. Hare Krishna.
How about
Prabhu
your
Harikata Mataji joined.
Yeah, it was
I see a
Ananda.
raised hand. Oh, okay.
My appreciation is when you come to ISKCON, we feel such a wave of connection with Krishna. And especially when Prabhupada was coming on the Jaladuta and is writing his prayers and talking and all that. So this is actually, it's really like this mission is really in direct connection with Krishna. It's very little bit odd actually, because I don't know. I mean, as per my knowledge, any other religious thing or religious practice, they don't have connection. At maximum, there is Devata worship, but I don't know how much connection is there with them even actually. But we see when Prabhupada is embarking this mission, actually Krishna is in full presence. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Haribol.
Haribol.
Hare Krishna.
Krishna. It looks only you and Preeti Mataji are only left, Mataji, to continue the readings. Oh, let me stop the live streaming. Stop. Stop share.